Paranormal Tuesday. Feeling good on a gorgeous... Oh, looks like my watch party just ended up getting really loud too, so I'm going to start that right here.
Nice.
Whoop. Okay, so...
two mics for the price of one.
Yes, two. Right, it's a bonus mic. You thought you were going to get one. You got an extra one. Anyway, it's a fantastic, beautiful Tuesday here in Wisconsin. And it's a perfect day to talk about paranormal stuff. Wendy, you feeling weird lately?
Always
Okay.
feeling weird.
Good.
Especially in 2020.
Right, where everything's
so weird
kind of
year.
weird in the first place. Yeah, no, that is certainly true. That is certainly true. Hey, in paranormal news, I did get a Travel Channel press release today.
Oh, I saw that too.
Okay, you got that?
Yeah.
It looks like Zach Baggins and the Ghost Adventures crew are going to open up the Dybbuk box.
I thought, wasn't that like proven to be a hoax or something?
Yes. Most of the stuff is a hoax. Like Ed Gein did not have a cauldron or whatever. Like that's a completely like Charlie Hintz from Cult of Weird did this whole write up about it, and it's just like Ed Gein's neighbor was trying to make money, or a guy that lived in Plainfield was trying to make money, and so like most of that stuff is like let's say not undocumented, but let's
unverified.
Just unverified is a good way to put it.
Well, how do you verify anything paranormal anyway? You know?
Well, right. That's a good point. Anyway,
it wouldn't be paranormal if you could verify it.
Anyway, I have seen the Dybbuk box up close and personal, Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
And
it scare you?
No.
Did you get cursed?
I did not get cursed. Nothing scary or cursed happened. It's in a really cool room. The design of the room is very haunted housey excellent. So there's a lot to enjoy on that front.
That's good.
It just made me laugh when I saw that, they're going to open up the Dybbuk box. And I'm like,
I know.
No, what's going to happen? Zach Baggins, a monster's going to come out and chomp Zach Baggins Johnson off.
I have to, give credit, though, to the writer of the press release, because they really did a nice job of creative writing on that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. It was exciting. Okay. Happy Paranormal to you. Paranormal
Tuesday. Hey,
Abby. Abby, how you doing?
Happy Paranormal Tuesday.
And a 1, 2, 3 oofta for Abby.
Oofta.
And I'm reading a book about Ed Gein right now.
Ooh.
Well, that sounds good, doesn't it?
It's a nice little light reading.
Yeah, a little light reading about Uncle Ed. Speaking of guys like Ed Gein, or even Zach Baggins, right? Like big individuals, big personalities get people around them who, like Ed Gein didn't have that in life. But certainly people like Charles Manson did. Certainly people like Jim Jones, David Koresh, like popular people. They're not just well liked. They're followed. They're admired. They're sometimes worshipped. We do that with celebrities, all the time. Wendy, who's the celebrity that you worship, that you think is great?
I think we know, Mike.
Okay.
I think he's right there. Right there.
Right. A celebrity that can
Hanging
do no
on my
wrong
wall.
in your eyes. It's those kind of things. And those people...
He's about the only one.
Right. Those people exist like on a fantasy level, Like they exist.
Yeah. How about you?
It's hard to say like who I really... Like I think that a lot of the people that I admired are like, that guy's like my hero or whatever. Like once you find out about him or whatever, you're like, oh, that person's not my hero anymore.
Yeah. Not only are they actually human, but they're actually kind of a repulsive human. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. No. And the thing is, I admired a lot. Alice Cooper, I feel, is someone who I admire.
Okay.
His, even when going back to he talks about how he's been married to the same girl since the 1970s, which is like unheard of. Like he married one of his backup singers or whatever.
Aww.
He's like, even when I was an alcoholic, I never cheated on her or anything. And you're like, that's pretty good. To go touring that much and all, like this. That's pretty good, Alice, for doing that. But he is one of those characters where it's like, okay, the more I know about him, like there's not like less to like. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
And I mean that traditionally is, as Living Color sang, the cult of personality, right? That you find someone who you admire so much that you'll follow them no matter what they do.
Da-na, da-na.
Right. Like my heart was broken when Arnold, you found all that stuff about Arnold Schwarzenegger banging the maid and everything.
Aww.
Because I'm like, there's a real American success story, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like it comes
Oh yeah,
comes to the U.S., makes something of himself, becomes like a world champion bodybuilder, becomes like the most popular actor in the world with only charisma. There's not a lot of, I'm sure he had an acting coach, but he's not Robert De Niro. Nobody's gonna be like, well, Arnold, he really showed a lot of pathos in that scene when he ripped that guy's arms off. It's just it's a funny thing. And then the more you learn, you're like, oh, but that's the thing. Our heroes have clay feet, right? That's the old cliche.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to find that out when we talk about, cults and like cult behavior. And, when you think about a cult in the movies or TV, it's almost, have you seen Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
No, I have not.
Okay. It's cute. And it kind of, there's some cult. It's like a girl gets out of a cult after, being in it for a long time.
Okay.
And then sees the real world kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And it's funny, and you're like, oh, okay. And it's kind of cute. But it doesn't, it's not like, it's not necessarily making light of the horror of what the cult experience can be. But you watched, there was a very popular Netflix series last year about was it a religious I didn't have a chance to watch it, but it was called Wild West Country. What was it called?
Wild Country, I believe.
Wild Country. All right. I'm thinking of the Wild West Country.
It was in the West of the United States.
But Will Smith was not in it.
No, I don't think so. Unless he was hiding in.
He didn't sing the theme song.
Hiding out in one of the compound places unseen. But yeah, that was a pretty compelling. It was just fascinating documentary because I don't remember hearing about that ever before, know, and I feel like it was such a huge thing between the government standoff and all of the, it was basically like a religious cult that started kind of taking over this whole community and making their own rules and, all the funny business that comes
that comes along with that kind of thing.
Right. And people in the seats of power kind of taking advantage of that position. And anyway, a utopian city.
Okay.
But yeah, I just was shocked that I hadn't heard of that entire news story until I watched the Netflix thing, and I was like, whoa, that's wild.
Well, okay, the utopian city. Now, I think when it comes down to the psychology of cults and how people get involved, it seems to be a couple of different kind of ways, as opposed to a more mainstream religion, which might have started off as a cult, and then just spread to be more popular. But it seems like with cults, a couple of things get people involved in the first place. Number one is the apocalypse. They think the end of the world is going to come.
Right.
And they think it's coming anytime. That was Charles Manson and his Helter Skelter. Right? That was Charles Manson, Helter Skelter, the upcoming race war. And that... sorry. Look, just have a bunch of honking out there. Hope it's not an accident. And so there's
Heaven's Gate cult.
yeah, the Heaven's Gate cult that, that aliens are going to come and
Oh gosh, that was so
the
sad.
end of the world. And then there's the utopian kind of cult. Like they're trying to create something that's the commune. That's, even the People's Temple was like that. The People's Temple combined some aspects of Christianity. The People's Temple was the Jim Jones cult that's famous from the 1970s because it started off, it seemed like it was a harmless kind of thing. And, Jim Jones combined like Christianity with Marxism, communism. And so this idea, and especially he focused on, which was a hot button topic then, it's a hot button topic now, racial equality. And so it really was a diverse group of people that joined the People's Church and Jim Jones. And like this utopian idea that like together we can return to the Garden of Eden. Like we have to follow these principles. And eventually that ended poorly because once they moved to Central America and Guyana, there were rumors of abuse and stuff like that. A U.S. Was it a U.S. representative or a U.S. senator? I can't remember that came down. But anyway, there ends up being a congressperson goes down to Guyana to investigate what he hears are like his former constituents, because they were in San Francisco for a while and then moved down there, investigating the former constituents. And as he's investigating it, they kill him. Like things go out of control and they kill a U.S. like somebody in the Congress. And so then what happens is Jim Jones realizes, okay, we just kill the member of U.S. Congress. It's all over. And so he's like, well, we're going to have to, guys, the only way we're going to bring about the second coming or whatever, and the only way we're going to bring up this utopia, and this is the same thing that Marshall Applewhite said with the Heaven's Gate cult, is if we kill ourselves. That's the only way, and then our souls will be delivered. And so what happens? I mean, he kills over 700 people, but the most brutal thing about it first is this is where the term drinking the Kool-Aid comes from, because they drank poison Kool-Aid. They gave the Kool-Aid to their kids first. And they gave the Kool-Aid to the kids, so once the parents had killed their kids, they were like, there's no more reason. And speaking of kids, you can hear mine screaming in the background. No Kool-Aid tonight.
Nice.
But once the parents had killed the children, the idea was there's no going back. Like they knew that
you're not gonna want to continue living after
so they're gonna kill themselves
doing something
anyway.
so horrible.
So and the thing is, that's all on like audio tape too. Like they were recording it, and so you can listen online to the last minutes of all the people of the People's Temple, and then you realize the danger that extreme beliefs can lead to, and that was terrifying. Okay, Pamela comes in. I taught at 2 private schools run by religious organizations, not churches, that were borderline cults. Some were very nice people, but a weird thing if you were not a part of the organization. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay, and when we talk about like some of the psychology of cults, that idea, a weird thing if you're not part of the organization. Okay? So one of the big things that's in like cults is that they tell you that your family is not going to approve. Like like they tell you right there.
Yeah, they're trying to like pry you away from the people that you trust the most.
Yes. And that's like in Scientology, which isn't necessarily a cult. I read Dianetics. I thought it was a pretty good book, to tell you the truth. I didn't want to give them any money for my e-reading or whatever.
Was it truly much better than Krishna?
It's much better than Krishna. Just like Jack Black and Tenacious D says, much better than Krishna. But the whole thing with Scientology, where they say like the people who don't want you to join are suppressive persons. And so you isolate yourself from those suppressive persons. Like if your parents don't want you to join, well, then you can't hang out with your parents. And that's why so many cults, they all live together. Like the Heaven's Gate cult, they all live in the same place. In the People's Temple, they, brought down hundreds of Americans down to the middle of nowhere. Not necessarily nowhere, but you know what I mean.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And okay, and when you join, they do this thing called love bombing, which is that when you join, everybody treats you like you're the greatest thing in the world. Welcome. Hello. We're so happy to have you. It's so exciting. If it's like in Charles Manson's cult, like the girls would have sex with new members. And I mean, that happens. They call it flirty fishing, I think is the name of it. You use, to bring people in, use sex to bring people in, because that forms that kind of connection. That is the love bomb. That's the love mega bomb going off with some doing it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the love explosion. But there's that. And, it's, so it's the process of as you're going through, and like with Scientology, the more involved you get, and so Abby comes and she's like, Scientology is a cult. At least that's how I think of it. Well, right. Anytime where they say if people don't approve of you being in this, you have to cut yourself off from them.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty cultish.
Pretty messed up.
But also I know that Xenu is listening to this conversation. So Xenu, you don't mean to make you mad. Wait, okay, Scott, I know people who've been held there against their will. It is big, scary, and powerful.
Oh my gosh.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
So people held against their will, obviously. But moving on, one of the reasons I was going to say, because each level you go up, you're spending money to get to the next level. And that's referred to as like a mystery religion, where you only learn more about the religion as you go into it. And that's actually been really popular throughout history. So this idea that the more you study, the more you get involved in it, the more secrets you are given. That's like a time-honored tradition back from thousands of years.
Yeah.
Of how you get people into your cult is that you
you get them invested.
Right, and it's a classic marketing technique. And then once you're in, and once you've spent money on it, even if in the beginning it was a dalliance, like even if you're like, you know what, I'm gonna join Scientology. They're our cult scapegoat tonight.
Nice.
Right. There's Beck in the background, like, don't make fun of my cult, man. But you spend money to get to each new level. Well, if you've already spent a couple $1,000s on something, it adds in the sunk cost fallacy that you've invested money to, and now you don't want to lose it. Ooh.
Speaking of Kool-Aid.
Yeah. What do you have there, Wendy? What is that?
Scott made me some Kool-Aid. It's like a pina colada, but it has some other things like not standard.
Okay. All right.
Mixed in it because we didn't have the standard ingredients, so
sounds good.
Creative alternative. But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. We'll be talking more about Puerto Rico in a second. Actually, speaking of pina coladas. Oh, you did for Wendy. Okay, we'll wait till Wendy gets back together, and gets back on. Anyway, so I mean, it's this idea that it's the sunk cost fallacy, and it's the same thing as anything else. Like it's like, we bought a van in 2003, and the van ended up being a piece of shit, right? Oh, I think Wendy's still. And so the van ends up being a piece of crap. And what happens is we go on our first tour with it. And as we're on the first tour, like the first night goes great. We're like, oh man, this is fun. We got our own van. We're a real band. We're hitting the road. This is kick ass. And then on our way the next day, the engine blows up in the middle of Missouri. And we have to be in Tulsa in like 7 hours. And the van's blown up in the middle of Missouri. And so we get there. We had just bought the van 2 weeks before. Maybe a week before. And they say, you're going to need a new engine. You're going to need a new engine. $5,000. So what do? We buy a new engine. And that's it. So we just bought a new engine because we spent the money on the van. And Wendy, I'm talking about how the sunk cost fallacy can lead to poor decisions.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And so that's what happened to us with the van back then. Okay. Anyway, so we bought a new engine for the van. We kept it for the next 5 years, and it ended up having a $2,500 van ended up costing us maybe $12,000. And we could have bought
I think it was more than that.
We could have bought a new van for the money we did in the
Easily,
van.
a much nicer van.
Yes, a much like okay. Scott's like Wendy froze as soon as she got a frozen drink.
Thanks for the drink, Scott.
And she's
delicious, by the way.
Frozen squared.
Where? What?
You had a frozen drink. You were frozen on the screen.
I can't see you. You're gone.
Because I'm in a new call here, so I need to share. I need to share the screen with you.
Thank you.
All right. So here is a disturbing cult that I learned about when I was looking for. So we've already talked about several cults on See Another Side. We did a whole show on the Nexium cult. Or I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
And that guy's
crazy.
He's going to do some time in prison. And that was a whole thing based on like, we're going to help you with your career. We're going to, and there was a lot of sex involved in there. Like that one guy, Keith Raniere, he was branding the women. So he was super classy, but that's the example of being, he's so powerful. That's part of your, like all of a sudden you're branded. Now that calls part of your identity. The sunk cost. Like I've spent so much money. I've spent so much time. I've had sex with the guy who's in charge, and now I'm branded.
My skin has a permanent mark on it with the tattoo or whatever.
Right. That's exactly the kind of thing. We've already talked about them. We did a whole episode on Heaven's Gate. So we did an extensive episode on Heaven's Gate. We talked about the Jim Jones a bunch and the People's Temple. That's just a really popular thing to talk about because everybody knows about the story, and it's such a horrible story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this is an interesting one that happened in the late 80s, and it fits in perfectly with the Satanic Panic. It fits in two things perfectly. Number one, it fits in with drug dealers being bad guys, as they were in every TV show in the 80s. Miami Vice and stuff like that. And also the Satanic Panic. So what's the Satanic Panic? If you weren't, if you don't remember the 80s or you weren't alive then, there was a period where it was rumored that there were satanic cults throughout the United States, Satanists in the highest level of powers. I mean,
could it be?
Satan? Yes.
Satan.
The church lady was right. No, but, and they could abduct children. They were performing human sacrifices. We've talked about this book on the show before, this book called Michelle Remembers. And it's about this girl who, through hypnotic regression, goes back and remembers being abused by her family and witnessing child sacrifices and human sacrifices. And so, like, that comes in. And Geraldo Rivera, he's talking about it. Sally Jesse Raphael, she freaking loved to talk about the Satanic Panic kind of stuff. All those talk shows during the day. Like, today, today there's plenty to be scared of. The internet and talk shows have all the things they can say. COVID cases are up, or they can say the rioters happen. There's a million things that they talk about. So, like, now it's fun. It's a different time in the in the world because we don't need to have sensational headlines because there's already sensational headlines happening every day. But back in the 80s, they were using Satan as it. So we go to 1989, and we have Spring Break 1989. Now, our guitar player, Ben, for Spring Break, has been to South Padre Island, right?
I think my sister went there one spring break too.
Yeah, and it's just like this den of iniquity. It's an island, right? It's just an island where people get wasted and do it, and it sounds awesome. When did you ever go on like a spring break destination or anything like that? Did you ever like do the traditional kind of spring break?
No.
I didn't do it till I already graduated, and then I went to Mexico with a spring break group from Minneapolis, and
it's fun.
Yeah, I mean we mostly did surfing stuff. So it wasn't like, 'cause I was with my girlfriend at the time and stuff, so we weren't just out there drinking and partying. There was obviously some of that. But so Mazatlan, we went to Mazatlan. And so, but there was like there's a Senor Frogs there with like a foam party and like, all the traditional stuff that you expect in a spring break time, skin to win.
Yeah. What was the MTV show that they used to do like from spring break?
What? It was MTV Spring Break?
Oh, that's what it's called. Okay.
Yeah. MTV Spring
That's what
Break.
I always think of.
Yeah. And that's
just people at the pool in bikinis, like dancing
And that's how it was, like when I went on spring break thing. So that was in 2000 when I went. But so Mark Kilroy, he is a University of Texas student. He goes in 1989. And he goes to a nearby town. There's a town right over the border from Brownsville, Texas. And that town is... Oh, it's got an M name. I couldn't remember it, and I didn't want to just try to throw out an M word in Spanish.
Yeah.
Matamoros.
Oh.
So this small, sleepy town, Matamoros, right across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, they head down, and they're going to party in Matamoros or whatever when they're on spring break at South Padre. He disappears.
Oh, no.
Nobody knows what happens to him.
Oh, boy.
Okay, and so they start, looking for, they're like, okay, somebody disappeared in Matamoros. And so a psychic reports that she sees his body. So she sees Mark Kilroy's body. She sees it next to a witch's cauldron.
Oh.
Weird.
What? What's weird about that?
Right. So, okay, do you think he disappeared, or maybe he was robbed by a prostitute, or all the kind of things that you could get in trouble with if you're a, young man, a 21-year-old junior at the University of Texas, partying over spring break? You think the things that could happen to you. Maybe he's in the clink. Well, they would know if he was in jail because the cops, he'd be able to call home.
Yeah.
So he completely disappears. 2 weeks later, they find his body and the bodies of 14 other people.
Oh, gosh.
On this, so they turn up, they're doing like a drug raid on this ranch outside of Matamoros, and they find 30 kilos of marijuana, and they're like, all right, we got them. We got the drug dealers or whatever. And then they discover a storage shed and this is from the Texas Monthly article that came out in 1989. Melted candles, cigar butts, empty bottles on the floor, and greasy cauldrons in the yard.
Yeah.
So the psychic got it right.
Wow. That's messed up.
And then, but the storage shed was like a devil's temple, is how the Mexican police described it. A black magic temple. And in fact, the guy who was running the investigation on the Mexican side, Juan Benitez Ayala, he said that they couldn't continue the search until they performed like a ceremony to kind of banish the black magic, which is, like a police officer. Like, imagine the police officers in Milwaukee when they found Jeffrey Dahmer's stuff saying like, we're going to investigate this, but we got to get a priest.
Nice.
Which, I don't think that's weird, right? You're like, I can see
especially
you doing
in different cultures.
Yes. And so it ends up that this drug dealer, Adolfo Constanzo, he's born in Miami, and then he grows up in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is what your pina colada, because Puerto Rico is the home of the pina colada, made me think of.
Is it really?
Yes.
I did not know that. Actually,
made with Texas college kids' blood. So so his mom moves to San Juan after her husband dies, and so this Adolfo Constanzo guy grows up there. But also when they take many trips to Haiti when they're kids.
Okay.
Haiti, obviously known for voodoo, serpent in the rainbow.
Yeah.
And as a teenager, he comes back to Miami, And because he's interested in voodoo from these trips to Haiti as a kid, he starts practicing black magic. This particular kind of black magic called Palo Moembe, which is, it's kind of like the voodoo. It's similar to voodoo as far as it's from like West African religious traditions, but then brought over to Cuba with the slaves in Cuba. And so developing this religious tradition, he becomes interested in that because he's from Haiti with all the Cuban immigrants in the 1970s. But a big part of it is animal sacrifice. And so he sacrifices chickens, goats, snakes, zebras, even lion cubs. Tiger King fans.
Oh, right. No. Yeah.
Horrible thing.
Abby was saying that Tiger King has a cult aspect to it. It's full of cults.
Dude, Tiger King is full of cults. This idea, like,
so crazy.
Doc, that guy that talks so well, that with the ponytail, he's such a good talker. And then you realize, oh yeah, he's got all these like concubines on the property that work for him.
Right.
That's just like, good on you for getting some girlfriends, dude. But it's I don't know.
That's a pretty sleazy way of doing it.
There's a sleazy aspect to it. Oh, and quick toast to Megan. Happy Tuesday, Megan. How you doing?
Hi, Megan. Cheers.
So he starts learning that kind of stuff, and then he becomes a drug dealer. So Alfonso Constanzo, which is an awesome name because it rhymes.
That is pretty sweet.
Adolfo Constanzo. I wish I had a rhyming name instead of a name that only rhymed with puberty. Right? So, but Adolfo becomes a drug dealer, and he starts convincing the people in his crew that what keeps the police away from them is the magic he's performing. And so they start performing these sacrifices, which, you don't have to be in a cult to be a sacrifice. There's plenty of sacrifice in Christianity and Judaism. Like, it's not, sure. We go back to the story of Abraham, and Abraham is like, they call Christianity, Judaism, and Islam the Abrahamic religions,
right?
Because they're all based on the founding father, Abraham. And so God tells Abraham in the Old Testament that I need you to prove that you love me. And the only way you can prove you love me is if you kill your son Isaac. And Abraham's like, oh my God, I don't do this. He says, oh my God, right? Because he can talk to him. But he's like, I don't want to do it, But then he eventually says, fine, I will do it. And as he goes to the altar, before the sacrifice finishes, like, God shows up and says, now I know you fear me. And when he looks up, it's not his son anymore, it's a ram. And then he kills the ram, and then that's an acceptable sacrifice. But this idea of, we talk about cults that do sacrifice. So it's not, you're like, it's not this barbaric kind of thing. This is a sacrifice of something that you really care about in order to appease the universe, to try to get some kind of favor, is as old as humanity itself. It's not, restricted to cults or anything like that. All the mainstream religions have some form of sacrifice involved. You could say that the ultimate human sacrifice was Christianity, was when Jesus,
right.
Did it. That's that whole idea is that they go to church to celebrate every week a human sacrifice, that kind of thing. But so Adolfo, he's like, this is how we're going to set up our sweet drug ring, guys. Is that we're gonna do some sacrifices, and this is the way we keep the police off our tail. And he's got a bunch of people around him, and he's got a crew, and they're all into it. They raid graveyards for human bones to put in their cauldrons.
Oh, that's fun. Nice.
But the thing is that eventually they're like, well, we're not going to get the more powerful protection we need with just these old bones. We're not going to, and so they start killing a bunch of people, originally around Mexico City. And then eventually, Adolfo decides that he needs the brain of an American student to sacrifice. And that's the only thing.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what they do to Mark Kilroy. Mark Kilroy gets picked up in, when he's visiting the Mexican town off of spring break, and they perform a human sacrifice on him, and they cut out his brain. And in fact, they even had like a special machine to rip out his spine so they could make a necklace out of the vertebrae.
Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
Gross.
So you can see how this integrates perfectly with the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. Because now this isn't just, you're like, okay, it's like wearing you wear your lucky rabbit's foot or something like that. Now you're wearing your lucky vertebrae necklace. And it becomes a foul, cruel thing that happens to this young man. And completely based on, and eventually, obviously, they find him, and Adolfo goes to prison, and his whole crew goes to prison too. But it's a cult based around Adolfo Constanzo. And Scott says now we're back in Ed Gein territory. Right, the grave robbing. Right, the grave robbing, and then the wearing the human stuff around your neck and everything. But that's the thing. That was a story I hadn't heard before. When I was looking up, I was like, okay, what are some, because, we've talked about a lot of the more, I hate to say more popular cults, right?
Yeah.
But we've talked about some of the big ones, and I'm like, that to me feels like a big story where somebody, a horrible thing happens to somebody. And, and is that much that different than like, well, that makes me think of one extra story I want to say. When I was talking to one of my somebody who's going to be a tour guide in Puerto Rico last year, the Puerto Rican ghost tour that I worked on is all about just regular hauntings. There's some UFO stuff, Bermuda Triangles, and legends and things. But he's like, well, there's also a tradition of brujeria on the island and magic, and some of it's black magic. And I'm like, black magic?
Tell me more.
Right. Tell me more. And the thing is, because I had like 5 meetings in a row, I was at the Starbucks, like it was 85 degrees, and I was on my 5th, cup of coffee. I was probably like, yeah, tell me more. And so, but he goes in and goes, well, I used to own a farm in the country here. And and I had a friend who I knew had some kind of shady friends. But he said that one time his friend comes over and brings this dude with a turtle. And the guy's like, can we just go out in the woods for a little bit? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, you can go out in the woods for a little bit. He's like, they went out in the woods for an hour, and they came back, and they didn't have the turtle.
Oh,
so
no.
He goes, what do you think they did? They didn't just set the turtle free. It was an animal sacrifice for some kind of magical ritual that he thought probably had to do with illegal stuff. But I just thought it was that interesting kind of thing, like when you're, it's the extreme version of the lucky rabbit's foot. It's the extreme version of wearing a St. Christopher medal.
Very extreme.
Right. And so that's the kind of thing. And I mean, you remember Breaking Bad. I forgot, was it the opening scene of season 3?
Oh, yeah.
Where you have the 2 bald brothers who are crawling up to the altar of Santa Muerte, which is the skeleton with the, it looks like it looks like a skeleton of the Virgin Mary kind of thing.
Right.
But this personification of death. It's a folk religion, and it's a super interesting folk religion too. But it's that idea that so she's a skeletal female figure clad in a long robe and usually holding a sai, so like a like
a Grim Reaper sickle kind of thing,
like a
right?
Grim sickle. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Or a globe. And so people just they have shrines to her, and it's just it's like burning a candle of a saint, kind of thing in your home. And so Santa Muerte becomes just another, or in voodoo you have Baron Samedi And if you go to the Voodoo Museum, which we talked about at length last week, I think, going to the Voodoo Museum,
Right.
you have, you have the altar where you put a cigarette in the skull's mouth, and
Yeah.
you put all the different offerings. You put a little bit of whiskey next to
Yeah,
him.
the tobacco and booze are always popular items for that type of thing.
You must not be able to get that in the spirit world, right? Like they
There
don't
you
have
go.
any
Well, it could be.
They don't have any 7-Elevens in the spirit world where you can pick
Right.
up a 6-pack and a pack of smokes. But it's that same kind of thing. You leave an offering, you leave a sacrifice, you give something in order to get something.
Yeah.
And the more powerful thing, the more of a sacrifice it is, the more power you will get.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more, Isaac, what's more important to you? We were talking about that with the people's temple. And when the parents lost their children, that's it. They're going to drink the Kool-Aid too, because they don't want to live. And so what's a bigger sacrifice than your child, than Abraham having to give up Isaac? So what's a bigger sacrifice than a human being? And that's the ultimate power. So that's what becomes interesting about these cults, because you get so far in that you think you have to do these kind of things. And so, that's it's the us versus them mentality. It's that like how we need this to survive. So that particular cult I thought was pretty scary, even though it wasn't like a big one.
Oh man. Yeah.
It was just a drug ring kind of thing, but still a drug ring willing to do those kind of things. Because you usually think of it like business, right? Okay.
Right.
If you're only going to get killed if you're getting involved with these kind of people, if you borrow money, or if you try to make money on drugs, or if you try to steal somebody's territory. But no, you could be killed just by being a stupid spring breaker.
Yeah, I know, it's really terrible.
That's what makes it scary. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of knowing that we have like these small cult camps around, like there's a lot of them that a lot of people don't even know about. So in New Berlin, Wisconsin, which that's my dad taught at the high school in New Berlin forever. I was on an internet forum, and I was talking to somebody who'd mentioned they were in New Berlin. They're from New Berlin. It was a national internet forum. So if the fact is that they were from New Berlin, I'm like, oh, cool, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm from Big Bend, right down the street. My dad taught at Eisenhower, blah. And he mentioned a certain bar called Chumley's. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, Chumley's is where I went to after I went to my teacher's funeral. And so I'm like, oh yeah, Chumley's. Like I was there like 3 years ago after my high school teacher died, and I went to his funeral. And somebody pipes in, he's like, that's where all the Nazis hang out. And I'm like, what?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I remember that. I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, because I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, Nazis?
Seriously.
Like it's not old Berlin, it's New Berlin. And like, there's a bunch of rednecks, but I don't think there's any Nazis.
Right.
And then I look it up, and there's like there's an occult Nazi camp outside of New Berlin, and it doesn't have a lot of members, but it has a ton, like a bunch of members that live on this like farm, with like this Aryan ideal thing, like so it's real. And I was like, oh no, there are New Berlin Nazis. Like I only thought we had Illinois Nazis from the Blues Brothers. I didn't think we had Wisconsin Nazis, but we do, and it's real. And so you see that and you're like, how could people get involved in something like that? How would anybody, if anybody said to you, you should join my organization, one of our heroes happens to be Adolf Hitler, but you know what? That's not,
right.
Like
no.
You'd be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
And it's just, it's that idea, you prey on people who, low self-esteem, orphans. Interestingly enough, women seem to be more, involved in cults, or they seem to be more not necessarily susceptible, but, like there are more cult members, at least like after the deprogramming and stuff, who are women than men. And it's the different things. So like, is it a matter of like they come in after the love bombing? Like, what kind of tactics do they use to get people to stay in there? You know, it's the saying embarrassing things. It's the taking embarrassing photos. You know, in Scientology, what they do is you confess everything you've done on your way to becoming clear. Like you have these, and they record all of these discussions that you have where you talk about your life, your sins, all that kind of stuff. It's like if you went to church and you went to confessional and the priest like recorded your confession.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that shit? You'd be like, what? You can't record my confessions. Like you're supposed to be like this, you know, you're not supposed to record
Yeah, it's
it.
supposed to be the sacred place, but privacy and,
you know, but that
and whatnot.
And all of a sudden you're incriminated. All of a sudden and then you're in deep. And I think that's the kind of thing where it keeps people coming back. And that's one of the fascinating things about this particular thing, because a lot of what we talk about in marketing are the same things that cults use to get you in there. So, it does look like, thank you for hanging out for Paranormal Tuesday discussion about cults. I was glad I was going to tell this story because I think the really sad story about Mark Kilroy, and the thing is, we only know about Mark Kilroy because like he's an American student. There's also like 14 other people whose bodies they found that we don't know about because they weren't as high profile. And so like those poor Mexicans were really, like that's just as big of a crime. And sometimes it seems like we have to you know, that it has to be that kind of, an American died, now that death counts. But like that's how it is maybe in the media. But you realize that these are brutal things, and they're really sad, and every life counts, and it's sad. I was just thinking about that, like, Mark Kilroy is the only name I have associated with the story. And there's 14, he's like 1/5
I know,
of all the people who were murdered, and their spines ripped out. So cults, scary, watch out.
On that note.
Yes, don't join them. So, but, you know, it's not like that self-improvement and everything like that isn't good. But when they tell you to stop hanging out with the people you love or the people who are looking out for your best interests, well, to go back to the 80s and Nancy Reagan, just say no, baby.
Right.
Okay. So we can see we're going to hang out with you guys in the Patreon room coming right up.
Hangout night.
Yes,
monthly
it's hangout
night.
For anybody who is wondering, well, what's our Patreon room? Just make sure you check out patreon.com/sunspotmusic. And we do a hangout every month where it's a big Zoom call, and we get silly, and we'd love to get silly with you. And then also we'll send replays of this and all that kind of deal. So if you guys like that, please check out patreon.com/sunspotmusic, where we get to have discussions about movies, paranormal, favorite music, and also behind the scenes discussions too. So hope you guys are having an awesome week. Thursday, Wendy and I will be back with our partner Ben at 7:30 p.m. for Sunspot's Thirsty Thursday. So thank you for joining us for some Paranormal Tuesday, and we will see you next week. And you Patreons, we will see you in the hangout.
Bring your popcorn.
I don't have any pop.